Go ahead.
The seven
Meher
realities.
Baba ki jai.
Jai. The seven realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following. The only real existence is that of the one and the only God, who is self in every finite self. The only real love is the love for infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons, even in the midst of worldly duties, all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so-called bad, in saint and in so-called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand, without expectation of reward. When compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual, amidst every kind of hardship, is resigned with perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
So, yeah.
Kama is here.
Yeah, I noticed.
Kama,
Hi,
say
Kama.
something from Mehrabad. Show us a picture if you can.
Jai Baba, Jai Baba. I'm in the
Jai
Samadhi
Baba.
right now, so I'm keeping myself as quiet as possible. But I'm away in so it's beautiful. It rained out here, and it's very quiet.
Very nice. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Okay, so we finished. I'll just confirm. Yeah, so we finished. I think you stopped here, right, Sunil? The first part of qualifications of.
Yes.
1 second. Wait a minute. I'll just close Adobe and open it for some reason. It's So this is what we read last Saturday. This Sunil, you read entering into the realities of inner life, which is the part one of qualifications of the aspirant. We ended that chapter. So we'll go to part two. I'll just increase the size. Okay, let's get started with this. With part two, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Some divine qualities. Qualities necessary for spiritual life interconnected. If the inner life of an aspirant is to be harmonious and enlightened, he has to develop and express many divine qualities while he is engaged in his daily duties. Each quality by itself may not seem to be extremely important, but to consider it apart from its necessary relationship with other important qualities is not correct. In spiritual life, all these qualities implement and support each other, and their interconnection is so vital that not one of them can be completely ignored without detriment to many other essential qualities. So, considered in its true function, each of these divine qualities turns out to be absolutely indispensable for a complete life. Patience and persistence. Every person is a rightful heir to the truth, but he who would inherit it must be spiritually prepared for it. And this spiritual preparation sometimes takes several lives of patient and persistent effort. Therefore, one of the first requirements of the aspirant is that he should combine unfailing enthusiasm with unyielding patience. Once an individual is determined to realize the truth, he finds that his path is beset with many difficulties, and there are very few who persist with steady courage till the very end. It is easy to give up the effort when one is confronted with obstacles. This might be illustrated by a story of a man from Pune, India. He once read a spiritual book that impressed him so deeply that he felt like renouncing everything. He left Pune and went to a forest near the city, and sitting under a tree with prayer beads in his hand, he began to repeat God's name. He kept doing this all day in spite of much inconvenience and dwindling enthusiasm. After sunset, he heard from all sides the cries of animals. And though these cries grew louder and louder in the gathering darkness of the night, he persisted in his determination. However, when he saw through the darkness a huge bear coming toward him, he fled for his life and ran at top speed until he fell unconscious in a shop back in Pune. As he regained consciousness, he related his adventure to those who had gathered around him, much to their amusement, and that finished his mood for renunciation. Accepting world as it is. Spiritual effort demands not only physical endurance and courage, but also unshrinking forbearance and unassailable moral courage. The world is caught up in Maya and is addicted to false values. Therefore, the ways of the world run counter to the standards the aspirant has set for himself. If he runs away from the world, that does not help him. He will again have to come back to the world to develop that quality which would enable him to face and accept the world as it is. Very often, his path lies through the world that he has to serve in spite of not liking its ways. If the aspirant is to love and serve the world that does not understand him or even is intolerant toward him, he must develop infinite forbearance. Forbearance. As the aspirant advances on the spiritual path, he acquires through his contact with the perfect master an increasingly deeper understanding of true love. This makes him painfully sensitive to the impact from outside actions that not only do not taste of love, but actually bring him into contact with cold contempt, cynical callousness, agonizing antipathy, and unabating hatred. All these encounters try his forbearance to the utmost. Even the worldly person suffers in a world he occasionally finds indifferent or hostile. But he is more thick skinned and his suffering is less acute. He does not expect anything much better from human nature and thinks that these things are inevitable and incurable. The aspirant who has tasted a deeper love knows the hidden possibilities in every soul. Thus, his suffering is more acute because he feels the gulf between that which is and that which might have been. If only the world had even faintly appreciated the love he has begun to understand and cherish. Moral courage and confidence. The task of forbearance would be easy if the aspirant could become reconciled to the ways of the world and accept them without challenge. Having seen the higher truths, however, it becomes his imperative duty to stand by them even if the whole world opposes him. Loyalty to the higher truths of his own perception demands unshakable moral courage and readiness to face the criticism, the scorn, and even the hatred of those who have not yet begun to open up to these truths. Although in this uneven struggle, he does get unfailing help from the master and other aspirants. He has to develop the capacity to fight for these truths single handedly without relying upon external help all the time. This supreme moral courage can only come with supreme confidence in oneself and in the master. To love the world and serve it in the ways of the masters is no game for the weak and faint hearted. I'll just pause if anybody has any questions or discussion, or I will keep going. Freedom from worry. Moral courage and self confidence should be accompanied by freedom from worry. There are very few things in the mind that eat up as much energy as worry. It is one of the most difficult things not to worry about anything. Worry is experienced when things go wrong, and in relation to past happenings, it is idle merely to wish that they might have been otherwise. The frozen past is what it is, and no amount of worrying is going to make it other than what it has been. Nonetheless, the limited ego mind identifies itself with its past, gets entangled with it, and keeps alive the pangs of frustrated desires. Thus, worry continues to grow into the mental life of a person until the ego mind is burdened by the past. Worry is also experienced in relation to the future, when this future is expected to be disagreeable in some way. In this case, worry seeks to justify itself as a necessary part of the attempt to prepare for coping with the unanticipated situations. I'll repeat that line. In this case, worry seeks to justify itself as a necessary part of the attempt to prepare for coping with the anticipated situations. But things can never be helped merely by worrying. Besides, many of the things that are anticipated never happen, or if they do occur, they turn out to be much more acceptable than they were expected to be. Worry is the product of feverish imagination working under the stimulus of desires. It is the living through of sufferings that are mostly of one's own creation. Worry has never done anyone any good, and it is very much worse than mere dissipation of energy, for it substantially curtails the joy and fullness of life. Cheerfulness enthusiasm, and equipoise. Among the many things the aspirant needs to cultivate, there are few that are as important as cheerfulness, enthusiasm, and equipoise. When the mind is gloomy, depressed, or disturbed, its actions are chaotic and binding. Hence, arises the supreme need to maintain cheerfulness, enthusiasm, and equipoise under all circumstances. All these are rendered impossible unless the aspirant succeeds in eliminating worry from his life. Worry is a necessary result of attachment to the past or to the anticipated future, and it always persists in some form or other until the mind is completely detached from everything. One pointedness. The difficulties on the spiritual path can be overcome only if the aspirant has one pointedness. If his energies are dissipated in worldly pursuits, the progress he makes is very slow. One pointedness implies dispassion concerning all the allurements of the phenomenal world. The mind must turn away from all temptations, and complete control must be established over the senses. Thus, control and dispassion are both necessary to attain one pointedness in the search for true understanding. Guidance from Master. The supreme condition for sure and steady progress on the path is the benefit of guidance from a perfect master. The master gives just that guidance and help which is necessary according to the immediate needs of the aspirant. All the master expects is that the aspirant will try his best for spiritual advancement. He does not expect immediate transformation of consciousness except where the ground has been previously made ready. Time is an important factor in spiritual advancement, as it is in all material endeavors. When the master has given a spiritual push to the aspirant, he waits till the help thus given is completely assimilated by him. An overdose of spirituality always has an unhealthy reaction, particularly when it is inopportune. The master therefore carefully selects the moment when his intervention is assured of maximum results. And having intervened, he waits with infinite patience till the aspirant really needs further help. So, how many of us have reached a point where we have got this intervention?
Jai Baba, I have a
Come.
suggestion.
Sure.
Go to page number 113, 113.
Yeah.
Yeah, go to the last paragraph, which starts with infatuation, lust, and greed.
Uh-huh.
Okay, you start reading that, this page, next page, and I'll tell you when to stop. Jai Baba.
Sure. So, as you heard, I am on page 113. I'm starting from the last paragraph. Infatuation, lust, and greed constitute a spiritual malady which is often rendered more virulent by the aggravating symptoms of anger and jealousy. Pure love, in sharp contradistinction, is the bloom of spiritual perfection. Human love is so tethered by these limiting conditions that the spontaneous appearance of pure love from within becomes impossible. So, when such pure love arises in the aspirant, it is always a gift. Pure love arises in the heart of the aspirant in response to the descent of grace from a perfect master. When pure love is first received as a gift of the master, it becomes lodged in the consciousness of the aspirant like a seed in favorable soil. And in the course of time, the seed develops into a plant and then into a full grown tree. Spiritual preparation for grace. The descent of the grace of the master is conditioned, however, by the preliminary spiritual preparation of the aspirant. This preliminary preparation for grace is never complete until the aspirant has built into his spiritual makeup some divine attributes. For example, when a person avoids backbiting and thinks more of the good points in others than of their bad points, and when he can practice supreme tolerance and desires good for others, even at the cost to himself, he is ready to receive the grace of the master. One of the greatest obstacles hindering this spiritual preparation of the aspirant is worry. When, with supreme effort, this obstacle of worry is overcome, a way is paved for the cultivation of the divine attributes that constitute the spiritual preparation of the disciple. As soon as the disciple is ready, the grace of the master descends. For the master, who is the ocean of divine love, is always on the lookout for the soul in whom his grace will fructify. Pure love, very rare. The kind of love that is awakened by the grace of the master is a rare privilege. The mother who is willing to sacrifice all and to die for her child, and the martyr who is prepared to give up his very life for his country, are indeed supremely noble. But they have not necessarily tasted this pure love born through the grace of the master. Even the great yogis who sit in caves and on mountain tops and are completely absorbed in deep samadhi, meditative trance, do not necessarily have this precious love. Pure love, awakened through the grace of the master, is more valuable than any other stimulus that may be utilized by the aspirant. Such love not only combines in itself the merits of all the disciplines, but excels them in all its efficacy to lead the aspirant to the goal. When this love is born, the aspirant has only one desire, and that is to be united with the divine beloved. Such withdrawal of consciousness from all other desires leads to infinite purity. Therefore, nothing purifies the aspirant more completely than this love. The aspirant is always willing to offer everything for the divine beloved, and no sacrifice is too difficult for him. All his thoughts are turned away from the self and come to be exclusively centered on the divine beloved. Through the intensity of this ever-growing love, he eventually breaks through the shackles of the self and becomes united with the beloved. This is the consummation of love. When love has thus found its fruition, it has become divine.
Jai Baba, you can stop here.
Yeah.
The reason I asked you to read this was because the chapter you are reading, Qualification of the Aspirant, the subtitle is Some Divine Qualities. I think the two things that jump out of the second part of the reading is the very part, one of the greatest obstacles hindering this spiritual preparation of the aspirant is worry. When with supreme effort, this obstacle of worry is overcome, a way is paved for the cultivation of the divine attributes that constitute the spiritual preparation of the disciple. So this particular line corresponds to the chapter Qualifications of the Aspirant and Some Divine Qualities. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to summarize the divine qualities that are required. The aspirant, the inner life of the aspirant has to be harmonious and enlightened. And there are many divine qualities that he needs to have when he's engaged in his daily duties. The spiritual preparation sometimes takes several lives of patient and persistent effort. He should combine unfailing enthusiasm with unyielding patience, persist with steady courage till the very end. Spiritual effort demands not only physical endurance and courage, but also unshrinking forbearance and unassailable moral courage. The world is caught up in Maya and is addicted to false values. If the aspirant is to love and serve the world that does not understand him or even is intolerant toward him, he must develop infinite forbearance. We read earlier unshrinking forbearance and unassailable moral courage. Then he says he acquires through his contact with the perfect master an increasingly deeper understanding of true love. This makes him painfully sensitive to the impact from outside actions that not only do not taste of love, but actually bring him into contact with cold contempt, cynical callousness, agonizing antipathy, and unabating hatred. All these encounters try his forbearance to the utmost. And then the aspirant who has tasted a deeper love knows the hidden possibilities in every soul. Having seen the higher truths, it becomes his imperative duty to stand by them even if the whole world opposes him. Loyalty to the higher truths of his own perception demands unshakable moral courage and readiness to face the criticism, scorn, and even the hatred of those who have not yet begun to open up to these truths. The aspirant has to develop the capacity to fight for these truths single-handedly without relying upon external help all the time. This supreme moral courage can only come with supreme confidence in oneself and in the master. This line actually reminds me of the three kinds of faith, which we will read later in another chapter. This supreme moral courage can only come with supreme confidence in oneself. Number one, faith. Second is faith in the master. And the third one is faith in life. To love the world and serve it in the ways of the masters is no game for the weak and faint-hearted. Moral courage and self-confidence should be accompanied by freedom from worry. So not only is it about renunciation of desires, but I think freedom from worry is a very important quality that an aspirant needs to get influenced by. The limited ego mind identifies itself with its past, gets entangled with it, and keeps alive the pangs of frustrated desires. Thus, worry continues to grow into the mental life of a person until the ego mind is burdened by the past. Worry is also experienced in relation to the future. So, here it's been given a lot of emphasis on worry. Worry has never done anyone any good, and it is very much worse than mere dissipation of energy, for it substantially curtails the joy and fullness of life. So then Baba says the aspirant needs to cultivate cheerfulness, enthusiasm, and equipoise. Hence arises the supreme need to maintain cheerfulness, enthusiasm, and equipoise under all circumstances. The aspirant succeeds in eliminating worry from his life. Then he talks about one-pointedness. The difficulties on the spiritual path can be overcome only if the aspirant has one-pointedness. One-pointedness implies dispassion, which is detachment, vivek and vairagya, concerning all the allurements of the phenomenal world. The mind must turn away from all temptations and complete control must be established over the senses, the physical, five physical senses and one mental sensation of thought. That is where for me, the Vipassana helped. Thus, control, I will call awareness, and dispassion are both necessary to attain one pointedness in the search for true understanding. The supreme condition for sure and steady progress on the path is the benefit of guidance from a perfect master. So this is being repeated in almost every reading, The guidance of a perfect master is key here. And time is an important factor in spiritual advancement as it is in all material endeavors. So I guess the saying goes that they say having a human life is very sacred. Don't lose this opportunity to become God realized or attain nirvana. Jai Baba.
Thanks for that summary, Kama. Any questions from the others? It's a special chapter for all of us to internalize and think of what is required as aspirants. So, any other thoughts, questions?
No questions. Absolutely.
Very good. Very good.
Just to be implemented. That's it.
Yes, that's the tough part.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Jai Baba.
So, Kama is almost whispering into the phone because he's a few feet away from the Samadhi. He's in Mehrabad.
We should
So-
consider this as a message from Samadhi. then.
Oh, Jai
Yeah.
Baba. Jai Baba.
Yeah. Great. So let us continue to the next chapter. Qualifications of the aspirant, which is readiness to serve as part 3. Aptitude and abilities. The aspirant always has to be in readiness to serve the cause of humanity. He need not apply himself to any type of work, irrespective of his capacities. He has to select that type of work which he is qualified to do by virtue of his individual aptitude and abilities. But whatever service he can render by virtue of his capacities, he renders it even when the circumstances are most trying. The ordeals through which he may have to pass are many, but his determination to serve whenever possible must remain unshaken. No claims of the limited I. The aspirant is not in any way attached to the idea of service. However, in the sense of maximum results being secured through himself alone. If any service needs to be rendered, he is willing to render it without any amount of sacrifice. But he is never bound by the false idea, I alone should have the credit for doing this. If the privilege of rendering the service falls to the lot of someone else, he is not envious. If he were to seek opportunities for himself to render service, it would be a form of selfishness. In service that really counts in spiritual life, there can be no thought of the self at all. There should be no feeling of having something for oneself or being the one who can give something to others. The self in all its forms has to be left entirely out of the picture. Service should spring out of the spontaneity of freedom if and when it is necessary, and it has to come in the cooperative spirit in which there is no insistence upon the claims of the limited I. Freedom from opposites of great and small. If the aspirant is completely detached from all works and their results, he becomes free from the vitiating opposites of great and small. The worldly minded feel their separative existence through achievements. Therefore, they have a natural tendency to judge their achievements in terms of tangible quantities. They grasp at the great things and avoid the little things. From the spiritual point of view, the so-called little things are often seen to be as important as the so-called great. Hence, the aspirant has no reason to eschew the one and seek the other. He attends to little things with as much zest as to great things. Although in spiritual life, even little things matter as much as great things, the conventions of the world usually fail to recognize this simple truth. By following conventionally accepted ideas, the scope of possible service to fellow beings gets artificially restricted to those activities that are conventionally regarded as important. Much that really is of vital importance to life is neglected, with the result that life is spiritually impoverished. Accepted values determine types of service. Thus, in a society dominated by merely material conceptions of life, service is interpreted in terms of providing for bread or clothes or other physical amenities of existence. In a society responsive to the value of intellectual culture, service is interpreted in terms of spreading learning in different forms. In a society that has developed a taste for beauty, service is interpreted in terms of organizing the production and distribution of works of art. In a society responsive to the ineffable values of the heart, service is interpreted in terms of constructing those channels that will facilitate culture and expression of the heart. In a society alive to the supreme importance of the spirit, service is interpreted in terms of imparting spiritual understanding. Of these different types of service, the service that is concerned with spiritual understanding is the highest, because spiritual understanding includes the right perspective to all human problems and promotes their solution. Two kinds of service. If there is no spiritual understanding, the desire for rendering service to others is harnessed by limited conceptions. Service is of two kinds. It consists in adding to the lives of others those things that are really worthwhile, or it consists in removing from the lives of others those handicaps that prevent them from having things that are worthwhile. If one's ideas of things that are worthwhile are narrow, the scope of possible service also becomes correspondingly narrow. It's an outstanding way of understanding service, right? Service is the way it is described in these two lines here is rather unique, rather than what we have heard of anywhere. But it is so beautiful. Little things that matter. The scope of service is not limited to great gestures like giving big donations to public institutions. They also serve who express their love in little things. A word that gives courage to a drooping heart, or a smile that brings hope and cheer in the midst of gloom, has as much claim to be regarded as service as onerous sacrifices and heroic self denials. A glance that wipes out bitterness from the heart and sets it throbbing with a new love is also service, although there may be no thought of service in it. When taken by themselves, all these things seem to be small, but life is made up of many such small things. If these small things were ignored, life would be not only unbeautiful, but unspiritual. Mistakes in worldly judgment. Just as the worldly minded have a tendency to judge positive contributions in terms of magnitudes, they also make a similar mistake in judging obstacles, handicaps, and adversities. Thus, for most persons, the adversity of another must assume colossal proportions if it is to deserve notice. It is characteristic of the world to give more importance to things that take shape in external and tangible ways than to things that are silent elements of inner life. Devastating war, for example, is considered to be a greater calamity than lingering lives filled with bitter hatred. Though, from the purely spiritual point of view, lives filled with bitter hatred are not in any way less evil than devastating wars. War assumes so much importance because of the many visual instances of cruelty. But hatred is equally unbeautiful even when it does not materialize itself into outward action. In the same way, epidemics, injuries, and the sufferings of the deathbed invite more attention from the worldly minded than the agonies of the heart that is heavy with the burden of unquenchable desire. Life as an integral whole. For the aspirant who is eager to serve without any desire for recognition and credit, everything that thwarts or perverts the release of a full life is worthy of attention, irrespective of whether it is great or small in the opinion of the world. Just as the building up or the collapse of empires has a place in the flow of universal life, the fleeting moments of sadness also have their own place in it. The importance of the one should not be measured in terms of the other, and the claims of the one should not be ignored for the claims of the other. The aspirant looks at life as an integral whole without allowing any part to monopolize his attention at the cost of others. Service inspired by love ensures harmony. Even when the aspirant is rendering service that is selfless, he keeps constant guard upon his mind. The aspirant must be humble, honest, and sincere. The service he renders must not be for the sake of mere show. It should be an outcome of true love. If the aspirant is inspired by love, his love will enable him to be in complete harmony with other aspirants without being jealous. If there is not complete harmony among fellow workers, the service that is rendered falls short of the spiritual ideal. Further, if the aspirant renders the outward service without a spirit of love, he is acting from a sense of duty, as in worldly institutions where there are paid workers. In the institutions of the world, people work for pay. At best, it is a cold sense of duty that prompts them to be efficient. Their work cannot have the inward beauty of work spontaneously done out of love. Importance of contact with a master. The aspirant can best assimilate the lessons of true service if he has the good fortune to be in contact with a perfect master. The master teaches not through preaching, but through example. When the master is seen in his capacity of rendering service to humanity, the aspirant is quick to catch that spirit because of his love for the master. Contact with the master is also helpful in imbibing the spirit of cooperation, which the aspirants can cultivate easily because of their common love for the master. They serve because the master wants it. They do the master's work, not their own. And they do it not of their own accord, but because they have been entrusted with that work by the master. Therefore, they are all free from any ideas of individualistic claims, rights, or privileges. They are keen only about the master's work, ready to serve his cause to the best of their ability when they are called upon to do so, and equally ready to hand over that work to another aspirant if he can do it better. Service without fuss. In cooperation of this type, the aspirants are in a way serving each other because the master's work is accepted by them all as their own. And in being useful to a fellow aspirant in doing the master's work, the aspirant is rendering a service to him as much as to the master. In such service, there can be no bossing because the aspirant is always conscious that it is the master's work, which he has accepted as his own, that he is doing. He further knows that as aspirants, they are all equal, and it is easy for him to cultivate the habit of serving in the spirit of utter humility. If service makes him proud, he might as well not have served. One of the most difficult things to learn is to render service without bossing, without making a fuss about it, and without any consciousness of high and low. In the world of spirituality, humility counts at least as much as utility. Ideal of service. When the master serves others, he does so not because he is attached to the work, but in order to help and also to set his disciples an example of selfless service. While serving others, he sees himself in them and thus experiences having served himself. In his unwaning blissful feeling of oneness, the perfect master knows himself to be at once the master of all and the servant of all. He therefore exemplifies the ideal of service in which there is no enslavement, either of the one who receives service or the one who renders it. The aspirant can speedily realize the ideal of true service if he has before him the example of a master. However, the spiritual preparation of the aspirant can never be termed complete unless he has learned the art of rendering service that gives not boredom but joy, that brings not enslavement but freedom, that does not set claims and counterclaims but springs from the spontaneity of free give and take, that is free from the burden of personal want, and that is sustained by the sense of ever renewed fulfillment. Jai Baba. I pause here. If there are any questions, else I request Kama to summarize. Any questions? Or we are all very good aspirants, looks like.
Why don't you also read the next chapter and then we can summarize?
Sure.
Unless there are any questions now.
No questions, so I will continue. So we are on page 365, qualifications of the aspirant, part 4, named faith. Faith and its forms. One of the most important qualifications for the aspirant is faith. There are three kinds of faith: faith in oneself, faith in a perfect master, and faith in life. Faith is so indispensable to life that unless it is present in some degree, life itself would be impossible. It is because of faith that cooperative and social life becomes possible. It is faith in each other that facilitates a free give and take of love, a free sharing of work and its results. When life is burdened with unjustified fear of one another, it becomes cramped and unrestricted. Faith and its counterpart. Children have a natural faith in their elders. They instinctively look to them for protection and help without requiring any letters of introduction. This quality of trusting others persists in later life unless a person is rudely shocked by others who, through self interest, deceive and exploit him. So, though faith is natural to man, it grows and flourishes in a society where people are reliable, honest, and worthy of faith. And it fades in a hostile environment. Faith in one another becomes complete and steady when it finds its counterpart in those qualities that invite and confirm faith. Being worthy of the faith others place in one and having faith in others are two complementary virtues. They are the conditions for an unhampered flow and development of individual and collective life. Importance of faith in oneself. Unqualified and implicit faith in each other belongs to the world of ideals. In actual practice, it exists only in special cases. Though it is very much to be desired, it cannot come unless the world is populated by persons who deserve unlimited faith. This condition requires a perfect development of the qualities of being reliable, steadfast, and invariably helpful. But these qualities that foster mutual faith remain undeveloped unless one has supreme faith in oneself. If an individual has no faith in himself, he cannot develop those qualities that invite and foster faith from others. The confidence that you can remain loyal under all sorts of trying circumstances to your own perception of what is right is the very foundation of the superstructure of a reliable character. Secure basis of self-confidence. Unshakable faith in oneself is as rare as implicit faith in some other person. Few have developed it to the degree that ensures effective and constructive control of oneself. In most persons, faith in oneself is always being challenged and undone by the constant experience of one's own frailties and failings, which often prove to be unyielding even when one knows what is right. Self-confidence, which is thus in perpetual danger of being shattered, can be securely established only when the individual has before him the vision of a living example of perfection and has faith in it. Faith in a perfect master, faith in a master. Faith in a perfect master becomes all important because it nourishes and sustains faith in oneself and faith in life, in the very teeth of setbacks and failures, handicaps and difficulties, limitations and failings. Life, as a person knows it in himself or in most of his fellow beings, may be narrow, twisted, and perverse. But life as he sees it in the master is unlimited, pure, and untainted. In the master, the aspirant sees his own ideal realized. The master is what his own deeper self would rather be. He sees in the master the reflection of the best in himself, which is yet to be, but which he will surely one day attain. Faith in the master, therefore, becomes the chief motive power for realizing the divinity that is latent in man. Faith and critical reasoning. True faith is grounded in the deeper experiences of the spirit and the unerring deliverances of purified intuition. It is not to be regarded as the antithesis of critical reason, but as the unfailing guide of critical reason. When critical reason is implemented by a deep and living faith based on pure intuition, its functioning becomes creative, fruitful, and significant instead of barren, ineffective, and meaningless. On the other hand, many forms of naive credulity cannot be broken through except by the fearless and free working of critical reason. However, it remains true that critical reason can touch and inform only those kinds of faith that are not based upon pure intuition. True faith grounded in pure intuition always remains an imperative that cannot be ultimately reduced to the conclusions of rational intellect. It is not derived from the limited intellect, but is more fundamental and primary, with the result that it cannot be silenced by any intellectual acrobatics. This does not mean, however, that faith need at any stage be blind, in the sense that it is not allowed to be examined by critical intellect. True faith is a form of sight and not of blindness. It need not be afraid of the free functioning of critical reason. Credulity and doubt. The right of testing the master through critical reasoning has always been conceded to the disciples. But if, after testing and being satisfied about the perfection of the master, a disciple shows any wavering of faith, it is a result of deplorable deficiency in his sincerity of approach and integrity of purpose. As there is much uncritical and undeserved credulity given to claimants of spiritual wisdom, so there is much unjustified wavering of faith in spite of a convincing basis for it in one's own experience. Just as uncritical credulity is ultimately the result of the unconscious operation of many worldly wants, unjustified wavering of faith is also due to the unconscious operation of desires that run contrary to the effective manifestation of a rationalized faith. In the first case, desire is the source of unwarranted belief, and in the second case, desire is the source of unwarranted doubt. Cravings have a tendency to pervert the functioning of critical reason. An unwavering faith grounded in pure intuition can come only to a mind that is free from the pressure of diverse wants. True faith is therefore a matter of gradual growth. It grows in proportion to the success that the disciple attains in freeing his consciousness from diverse cravings. Beliefs and opinions. Faith must be carefully distinguished from mere intellectual belief or opinion. When a person has a good opinion about someone, he is said to have a certain kind of faith in him. But this kind of opinion does not have that spiritual potency which belongs to a living faith in a perfect master. The beliefs and opinions of a person often constitute a very superficial layer of the human psyche. They do not have any integral relationship with the deeper forces of the psyche. They remain in one region of the mind without bringing about any radical changes in the core of personality, which determines the attitude toward life. People hold such beliefs just as they wear clothes, and in times of emergency, they tend to change their clothes to suit their immediate purposes. In such cases, beliefs are unconsciously determined by other purposes. The purposes are not consciously determined by beliefs. Living faith, creatively dynamic. Just give me 1 second. Living faith, on the other hand, has the most vital and integral relation with all the deeper forces and purposes of the psyche. It is not held superficially, nor does it hang like mere intellectual beliefs in the periphery of consciousness. On the contrary, living faith becomes a powerful factor that reconstructs the entire psyche. It is creatively dynamic. There is no thought unenlivened by it, no feeling unillumined by it, no purpose not recast by it. For the disciple, such living faith in the Master becomes a supreme source of inspiration and unassailable self confidence. It expresses itself primarily through the spirit of active reliance upon the Master and not merely through some opinion about him. Living faith is not a sort of certificate given by the disciple to the Master. It is an active attitude of confidence in the Master, expressing itself not only through implicit and trustful expectation of help from him, but also through the spirit of self surrender and dedication. Living faith, born of experience. Such fruitful and living faith in the Master is always born of some deep experience that the Master imparts to the deserving disciple. It is fundamentally different from the beliefs people hold either through uncritical acceptance or superficial thinking. Mere intellectual beliefs, for the most part, have very little spiritual importance. The Master, therefore, is utterly unconcerned with whether the disciple believes in him or in someone else. And he is equally unconcerned with whether the disciple at any moment does or does not believe in him. If, in some fortunate case, the Master, through his benign intervention, wins for himself the living faith of the disciple, as distinguished from mere belief, it is because he knows that the disciple will be helped through it. Testing the disciple. Just as the disciple is testing the Master's capacity to guide him, the Master, in turn, is testing the disciple's integrity of purpose. The Master is unconcerned whether the disciple doubts him or has faith in him. What he tests is whether the disciple is or is not sincere and wholehearted in his spiritual search and pursuit. The perfect Master is not at all interested in giving proof of his own divinity to the disciple, except when he feels that such proof is likely to be unfailingly useful and unavoidably necessary for the spiritual benefit of one who has surrendered himself to him. It's again very powerful chapter. Any questions, discussions, insights? No. So over to you, Kama. Why don't you summarize?
Yeah, Vedama. So I think the last two parts, one is faith, which is very clear. Faith in oneself, faith in a perfect master, faith in life. Life is a stage in which you need to play this game.
I think there's a lot of wind where you are. So if you can just adjust the location and start
There is a
again,
lot
we are
of
not
wind.
able to hear you. Yeah, there was a lot of static or noise. So try again. You're much better now. Please repeat from the
Can you
beginning.
hear me now?
Yes.
Is it better? Okay. So we are reading qualifications of the aspirant. We finished part 1 and part 2. Part 3 and part 4 dealt with readiness to serve and faith. So we have already understood what are the three kinds of faith: faith in oneself, faith in a perfect master, and faith in life. And what is interesting out here is, how do you get faith in oneself? So you have the guidance of a perfect master that helps us to have faith in oneself. And the grace of a perfect master is very mandatory, from my understanding, to have faith in oneself. Because it says that faith in a perfect master becomes all important because it nourishes and sustains faith in oneself and faith in life in the very teeth of setbacks and failures, handicaps and difficulties, limitations and failings. So we all know that all of us as spiritual aspirants go through ups and downs in life, even when we are under the umbrella of a perfect master. So that faith in a perfect master nourishes and sustains faith in oneself, because ultimately you have to have faith in oneself. Otherwise, you can't proceed further. Because once you have faith in oneself, despite all the trials and tribulations in life, then you can keep moving further. As we all know from the divine qualities that we read, that there are going to be people who are going to be antagonistic. So that is a very clear, the significance of having a perfect master and faith in a perfect master is so important. And then the other path is faith and critical reasoning. We remember that last time we read about CCDT, creative, critical, discriminative thinking, Vivek and Vairagya. So faith and critical reasoning go together, but true faith grounded in pure intuition always remains an imperative that cannot be ultimately reduced to the conclusions of rational intellect. The true faith grounded in pure intuition is not derived from the limited intellect, but is more fundamental and primary, with the result that it cannot be silenced by any intellectual acrobatics. Faith need not at any stage be blind. We know about blind faith, in the sense that it is not allowed to be examined by critical intellect. True faith is a form of sight and not of blindness. It need not be afraid of the free functioning of critical reason. But we can't just stop at critical reason, because that is just the mind. It's a tool. Ultimately, that intuitive ability that we need to develop or have the grace is very key. That is why it says the right of testing the master through critical reasoning has always been conceded to the disciples. That means, you know, that means basically that the teacher, the perfect master, allows the disciple to do spiritual shopping, do all those things. But it says, but if after testing and being satisfied about the perfection of the master, a disciple shows any wavering of faith, it is a result of a deplorable deficiency in a sincerity of approach and integrity of purpose. So the beauty is that you are allowed to go and test different masters, do whatever your critical reasoning intellect, the CCDT, creative, critical, discriminative thinking allows you to do. But once you have the grace of a perfect master, don't deviate from it. That is why Baba says, Mera daman nahi chhodna. Don't let go the coat. So this is a very key important fact that once you are 100% conviction, intellectual as well as experiential about a perfect master or avatar, stick to that and don't try to doubt it despite all the trials and tribulations. And also it says faith must be carefully distinguished from mere intellectual belief or opinion. So there is a clear difference, distinction given between faith and belief or opinion, intellectual belief or opinion, because this you will read in the chapter on God and Maya, the difference between belief and faith. So beliefs and opinions of a person often constitute a very superficial layer of the human psyche, especially the herd mentality that we all know about. Living faith, on the other hand, has the most vital and integral relation with all the deeper forces and purposes of the psyche. And living faith is more about intuition and also the grace of a perfect master. That is why it says, for the disciple, such living faith in the master becomes a supreme source of inspiration and unassailable self confidence. Such fruitful and living faith in the master is always born of some deep experience that the master imparts to the deserving disciple. So, this was on the faith part, where he also talks about testing the disciple. What he tests is whether the disciple is or is not sincere and wholehearted in his spiritual search and pursuit. So the master doesn't care whether you follow me or not, but he definitely is looking at, sometimes you get different tests like suffering. Are you going to get attached to your suffering, or you're going to say that suffering is a benediction? This is for the benefit in the long run. And then the last part of readiness to serve, it is especially about selfless service, but also that this relates to the chapter on spiritual infinity of the truth. I think that is a very great chapter which relates to this particular chapter on readiness to serve, because there is no duality in the kind of service you provide. You can smile at a person who's feeling, depressed, and make him feel good, or give a big hug, or you can write a big charitable check. It doesn't matter. So that is what it means, that anything that is given out of love, and service has to be out of love, not because you're working for an NGO and you want to change the world. That's not going to work out. So this chapter is especially useful for people who are working with NGOs and trying to change the world. And it also relates to the when we read about work for the spiritual freedom of humanity and the task for spiritual workers. So this could also connect with that. And again, the importance of contact with the perfect master is given, because when we see Baba, the kind of inner work he did, and all the kind of work he did with the monks, the lepers, the poor people. So by actually seeing the master do this, we are also inspired. So it's not just about theory, but practice and service without fuss and so on. Jai Baba.
Yeah, I know long back Sunil had questions on service, selfless service. I think Baba has slowly uncovered so many aspects to the definition of selfless service, to point of what service means, and of course, this is a very nice set of chapters on the qualifications of the aspirant. So we are down to 15 minutes for the day, and I want to use the time to welcome back Mamaji, who appropriately put the video on. So welcome back. I hope you're feeling better.
Jai Baba, Mamaji.
Jai Baba, Jai Baba. I'm feeling better. Thank you
Jai
for
Baba,
welcome.
welcome back, Mamaji.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm so happy to see you.
Indeed, indeed.
I am so messy, but I'm so happy to see you. I still put on my camera.
Oh, good, good. You are not You are not in a mess that I had gone through.
How are
Okay,
you now?
fine. I'm feeling better, fine.
The pain
Almost
has gone?
almost 99%. Once in a while it reminds me, but otherwise it's okay.
You have lost weight, huh, Mamaji?
Probably.
But they have found the cause of the problem. Is it sorted?
It's supposed to be gastritis and it is
Oh.
settling down, but still that back pain is still now and then nagging. Maybe I will have to attend separately to that, probably. Okay.
Yeah. Take good care of yourself, Mamaji.
Thank you.
When I meet
Thank
you,
you for
I
your.
will make nice food for you that can remove gastritis.
Yes. Not that Pagal Khana, lot of masala what you show.
No. This time I will not give you pagal khana. I will give you good khana.
Okay. Thank you.
Baba Khana.
Jai Baba, Jai
Baba
Jai
Khana.
Baba
Jai
Mamaji.
Baba. Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba. Jai Baba, good to see you.
Fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Jai Baba.
The rest of the time, I thought we can hear what's the on the ground report from Mehrabad. Come on,
Yeah.
tell us what's going on. Show us what's going on.
Well, Jai Baba, I came here on 2nd. When did I come here? Today is what, 2nd, right? Okay, I came here on the 29th. And so it's basically, you can come to the Samadhi, but you can't enter the inner sanctum, not even that outside part, but you can go around the Samadhi and the cabin. So I was doing the typical South Indian, going around the, Agraha, what do you call that? Where the idol is, we do the pradakshina, So I was doing my 7
Parikrama.
pradakshina of parikrama, yes, correct. So I did that, and it was quiet. And I think on the 7th they are opening up, but no accommodation. They are going to consider accommodation from 22nd based on logistics, which will be like 50 people each in hostel D and MPR, and it will be only maximum 3 days. And MPR will not, Meher Azad will not be open. So they are going to test this part for 50 pilgrims each and then see what happens.
Where did you stay, Khana?
I was staying with the gentleman, Dr. Narendra Prasad, who has a place which is parallel to the railway line about 2 kilometers from the Samadhi on the Ketgaon road. The Meher Glory, Meher Prasad, stuff like that. Yeah.
Can
So
you show us
Ashok
anything?
Bansali was, sorry?
Are you near the Samadhi? Can we have a look?
No, actually, I just walked back, because I was planning to have breakfast. So I was there from 7 o'clock till about 8:15, 8:30.
I see. Maybe tomorrow you can time it so that we can also wash our sins a bit.
Actually, I'm leaving today afternoon, actually. Yeah. But I have some pictures. I can send it to you today evening.
That'll
I'll
be
send
nice.
that.
That works.
Yeah.
So actually, there's no place to eat and stuff like that, or how are you managing food?
Well, basically, there is, in the village you can organize, somebody will deliver that.
Oh,
so
nice.
That's not an issue. Yeah.
From Marangaon.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's so nice.
So all of you are together or different places?
No, actually, me and Ashok are in a different place, and Vidya and Venu are near the Samadhi, near the Andhra guest house.
Okay. Great.
Very nice. Say our pranamase to Baba.
Yes, Jai Baba too. Yes, all the time.
And wishing you a complete recovery, Mama, soon. And
Thank you.
would like to have you in full form and in full action soon.
Maybe, but to sit for a long time, it is becoming a bit of a nagging thing. Anyway, I will try.
Sit, you can take the call in your earphones and then maybe sleep on the floor on a yoga mat. No, really, I think that's doable. So you put a yoga mat on the floor, put earphones, then you are good to go. Baba understands.
Yes, yes.
Jai Baba.
It's
Jai Baba.
more in the mind, Mama.
Ah,
I was
That's
reminded
it.
of what you went through when Kama said, "Suffering is a benediction." I know
I
it's.
remembered that, and he had also sent a passage
Mhm.
the WhatsApp that also I read through.
Hmm.
It also relates to the same thing. What you are going through is going near Baba. That's what.
Yes, yes. Anyway, so on that note, we'll wrap up a few minutes earlier today and pick up on reading tomorrow morning. And by then, we would have got some nice visuals from Mehrabad.
Yes.
Can we have a bhajan from Namita?
Sanjay ji, yeah, or Namita, whatever.
Sanjay ji.
Sanjay ji is better.
Don't escape, Namita. You were asked. Both of you can sing. We have 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Okay.
one each.
One each,
Sanjay
yes.
ji.
Pitaji will start.
Yeah, Namita ji will start.
Yeah.
It's like Viva exam. Suddenly, I forgot all the. But anyway, I'll try.
Sudden exam. Yeah.
मेहर मेहर अब रट लागी कैसे तुम बिन गुजर होगी बाबा अब तो आओ ना आकर मुझे संभालो ना कहती है ये दुनिया तेरी देखी है तू क्या मेहर मेहर की क्या बोले उन्हें तेरी दीवानी कैसे बताऊं उन्हें अंतर यामी तू मेरी हर सांसों में है इस दिल की हर धड़कन है तू मेरी हर सांसों में है इस दिल की हर धड़कन है बाबा अब तो आओ ना आकर मुझे संभालो ना अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय
Thank you, Baba.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Namita.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Over to you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Jai Baba.
Sanjay ji, now your turn.
Okay. मन अस्थिर चंचल जब जब हो अपने आपे से बाहर हो इस उलझन में एक सुलझ हो नाम मेहर का होठों पर हो समझ मना भूल कर कभी भी न आहें भरना समझ मना भूल कर कभी भी न आहें भरना गाओ रे मना मेहर मेहर नित गाओ रे मना सुख के दिन तो मन को भाए दुख में काहे जी घबराए सुख दुख एक समान मनाए, मेहर नाम ये जुगत सिखाए। समझ मना भूल कर कभी भी ना आहें भरना। तन को वस्त्र सभी पहनावे, बिना वस्त्र के मन रह जाए। मेहर स्मरण का वस्त्र चढ़ावे, तो मन काहे मैला होवे। समझ मना सुमिरन बिन कोई पल जाए ना। समझ मना भूल कर कभी भी ना आहें भरना। कहे प्रतापा इस मार्ग में, मिथ्याचार न हो जीवन में। प्रेम ही प्रेम हो लेन देन में, मेहर प्रेम हो घर आंगन में। समझ मना प्रेम बिन प्रभु जी को कछु भाए ना। गाओ रे मना मेहर मेहर नित, गाओ रे मना। अवतार मेहर बाबा की जय।
Yeah,
बाबा की जय।
very nice. Thank you, Sanjay ji.
Thank you. Thank you. Jai Baba.
Jai
Thank
Baba.
you.
Thank you.
जय बाबा।
Thank you
Thank
so
you. Jai
much.
Baba.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
Jai
Mr.
Baba. Jai Baba,
and,
everyone.
Sanjay, and wishing you again, Mama, to
Jai Baba.
come back and bounce
Jai
back
Baba.
quickly. Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba. Jai
Jai
जय
Baba.
बाबा।
See you all tomorrow.
See you in
Jai
the
Baba.
blue bus.
Yes.
Jai Baba.
Last 2 weeks of the year.
Yes, we'll do all the places where Baba went in India.